Hey, what's up, you guys? You're watching Team APS. Paul here again. Today, we're going to be talking about future-proofing Yu-Gi-Oh cards. So, what does this mean? Well, it's basically the idea that a Yu-Gi-Oh card can come out and work pretty much fine when it's released, but in the future can become obsolete or have, I guess, parts missing. This basically kind of got brought to my attention because I was on Reddit the other day and somebody was talking about the new Dogmatica ritual monster that protects all of your other Dogmatica monsters in the field and itself from the effects of your opponent's fusion, synchro, Xyz, and link monsters. This person was celebrating the way that they worded this effect because it meant that even if a fusion or Xyz monster gets special summoned back from the graveyard, it still will protect your Dogmatica monsters from its effects, which is pretty cool. So it doesn't just have to be summoned from the extra deck, because there are some cards in Yu-Gi-Oh that say like a monster summoned from the extra deck, and so like that kind of distinction makes this pretty useful. But as some people pointed out in the comments, this does mean that if Konami was ever to release a new summoning mechanic that uses the extra deck, and that's always something we always think about, like whether or not they'll do this, then that means that suddenly this monster won't be protected from that, and it's kind of obsolete. And it got me thinking that this is highly relevant for many different Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I think that the probably most infamous one is Dimensional Barrier. It's one of these cards that for a long time was quite powerful, but it also came out in like 2016. And so while it was released, it was super strong. You get to call either Fusion or Synchro or Ritual or Xyz or Pendulum, and your opponent can't like summon any of that for the turn. And also it negates the effects of all those monsters in the field that turn. And so all in all, a really great card, a really powerful trap, just strong counterplay against many of those decks. Still even sees some play today, but when Link Monsters came out, they presented a bit of a problem because Konami didn't write Link Monsters as part of its effect. They weren't out at the time and they couldn't put it on the card. So I guess the argument at that point becomes, well, maybe, should it have just included all extra deck monsters? Would that have been too strong? What does Konami do when a new like summoning type comes out? Should they maybe have just gone back and errated Dimensional Barrier? As we know now, they didn't do any of those things. Dimensional Barrier, when Lynx came out, was just suddenly a much less playable card. Now, thankfully, since then, it's kind of come back into style, right? I mean, when decks like Sword Soul were around or like Despia and stuff, it still can be a really useful way to like shut out any deck that does a specific summoning type. So that's good and well, but it does stand as sort of an example of like what happens when cards aren't, balanced around the future. And then I just kind of did a little bit more digging and realized that there's like an entire archetype that sort of got screwed by this, and that's Dustin's. Pretty obscure one, but Dustins are sort of supposed to be, they kind of remind me of Ojamas, I guess. They get summoned to your opponent's field, and then once they're on your opponent's field, they like can't be used as material, but it only writes, they can't be used as material for like Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, right? They don't mention Link monsters. Similarly, they can't be tributed, so it's like it's covering all, they were trying to cover all of the bases when the cards were released, but then Links came out, and now Dustins can't really be useful against Link monsters because if you give your opponent a Dustin, they'll just link it away. And it just, I don't know. It's kind of something that makes you wonder, what do you think is the best solution in these cases? Should Konami like errata these cards and just update them to work? I mean, I think it wouldn't be the hardest thing to do. I think that would be like a sensible errata. Some people, I think maybe if you're a little bit more cynical, I guess we'll say, you might feel like, well, Konami just does this on purpose. Maybe they know that these cards will become obsolete, and so this is just a way to kind of just, I don't know, make sales, right? Like if Dimensional Barrier is not good, but then they release like a stronger version of it or a more kind of inclusive version of it, then you have to get that instead. That's sort of kind of happened. Like a card that I would say feels like it sort of fits the Dimensional Barrier role is that card Spellbound that came out a couple sets ago. So it's this quick play spell that just says all the monsters in your opponent's side of the field currently can't be used as material, and it says material for like they can't be used as Synchro, Fusion, Xyz material, and also Link material. And so like that's pretty cool. Also they can't be tributed, but yeah, so that's pretty cool. It covers all the bases currently, but they still they sort of miss the fact that, well, if they make a new summoning mechanic, then Spellbound will also be correct in the process. And so it just kind of like leads to this circle of, can you ever really write these cards properly? What should be done when they just sort of immediately become obsolete? Yeah. Now, a related thing that I also figure I should mention was sort of rewinding back to the Dogmatica monster that's coming out, the Dogmatica Ritual monster. some people were saying that maybe Konami should make some like more inclusive terms. So like a term that got recommended a lot in that conversation was extra deck monster. And that should be like a designation in Yu-Gi-Oh! So extra deck monster in this case would mean any monster that begins the duel or originates in the extra deck. What that basically would mean is I say like I have a monster in the field like what's one that pops? Brondefleur, right? So it's a synchro monster, but if it gets like summoned from the extra deck, then any monster that says, oh, it's unaffected by monsters, special summon from the extra deck. Great. That's cool. But then if Baron de Fleur gets destroyed and I later use Monster Reborn on it, then suddenly, you know, it's not really a monster special summon from the extra deck anymore. It's just a monster on the field now. And the term extra deck monster would mean that no matter what happens, when Baron de Fleur is on the field, it is an extra deck monster. I guess it's kind of similar to that whole thing with link arrows where like, or well, now they're not really as relevant, but like back when there was like the extra monster zone, and if something got summoned from the extra deck, it had to go there. But then after it had like, you know, been summoned or whatever, it could still move, or if you use Monster Reborn, it would like go into other zones, like the main monster zones. So I don't know. I mean, this feels like this could have been like, this could be an interesting thing to change. I think it's one of the few changes that Yu-Gi-Oh! Could probably make that wouldn't really hurt too much of anything. Although I guess still, now there's all these other cards that you would want to retroactively errata, and I know erratas are just they're not always the easiest thing. So yeah, I don't know. I thought it was an interesting topic. I think it's something that Konami is probably pretty aware of. I know they've already got other problems with this design space in Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Like there's already kind of the whole thing with like machine duplication, right? Where machine monsters that have under 500 attack will always be machine dupe targets. So Konami has to always be careful in the future with what machines they give those attributes to. Same with, you know, level 1 monsters and 1-for-1, for instance. So there's always going to be kind of these different constraints, I think, that exist in the game and like prevent maybe Konami from doing certain things or cause like certain new cards to unintentionally like function differently or get nerfed or not work at all. I feel like there's like some example of one that I always read about. Like it's one of those pendulum archetypes. Maybe it's a Morphage or something like that. That just after the Master Rule 4 revision or whatever, just suddenly became like very awkward and hard to play, like because they just don't really work. Someone in the comments will know. I'm not sure, but yeah. So basically, that was my sort of take on it. I think that it's just something that's kind of intriguing. Like, what do you guys think? Do you feel like this is something that Konami should go in and change? Do you think it's something that they shouldn't really bother with at all? Do you play a deck that is like personally affected by it? As like for me, I actually kind of wanted to build a Dogmatic or Ritual deck in real life, or at least like in Master Duel or something. So this card excites me, but it does make you wonder, you know, what happens when Konami releases a new summoning type. Okay, well, anyways, that's going to be it. I will see you guys in the next one, hopefully tomorrow, of course, because I'm trying to upload a video every single day this month on this channel. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. All right, that's going to be it. See you in the next one. Best turn.